Here we are in Marvelous Designer, and I'm just going to import our OBJ, actually import OBJ, and this is Takeshi merged. So we are opening an avatar and add arrangement points, create fitting suit no, centimeters 100%, and make sure the Y is up and say OK. This is our character in the center of the grid, and first thing I want to do is go under avatar and measurements and high measure and measure the size just to make sure that we are at the correct scaling, and is 155 centimeters. Double check it in Maya and is 155 centimeters, so it's correct. Second thing I want to do is make sure about two things. Pressing Q to select, and this is the gizmo in Marvelous Designer. Under setting preferences in gizmo, make sure is under world coordinates, because local is quite a tricky gizmo to work with, and I personally prefer setting the gizmo to a world coordinates, and this is one of the first things to do. There are other few settings in Marvelous Designer to check, and is under settings and preferences. The view control, we can make sure there is Maya, so we have the same navigation as Maya if you are using 3ds Max, so you'll be very used to the navigation in Max, but I personally use Maya, so we have the same navigation controls. And also in the user interface, centimeters, and close it. Let's have a quick look at the user interface of Marvelous Designer. So here there is the simulation button, which you can activate also by pressing the spacebar. And there are different kinds of simulation: normal, fitting, accurate, and animation. But the big changes in the latest version is CPU and GPU. I'm going to test the GPU because looking at the latest test, I've seen that it's much faster and really accurate. Then pressing the Q, you can access the gizmo. Here the next tool is the pin. I'm going to demonstrate with creating some fabric. So pressing S, you can create a square of fabric. Here with the gizmo you can move it in place. And note that we are working with two windows. On the left we have the 3D window where we are going to do all the simulation and the 3D work, and on the right the 2D pattern window where we are going to draw and cut all our clothing. So here I can pin box, for example, the corner of the fabric, and then simulate, and then I can move in place these pins and I can shape. This can be really helpful to shape the clothing and attach the clothing to the character. For example, in some places I can add as many pins as I want in different places and move it, and then I can right click and deactivate the pins. Another tab which is really useful is the history. So here I can go back to the previous state . So here I can go back, and for example, instead of using the pins, I could use the tack, which are a sort of a more advanced pin. So with this one, see, when I put this tack on avatar, I can draw a line and tack any part of the fabric to the avatar. And when I simulate, these are staying in place. This is another good tool to shape the fabric. On top we have different display options. Here the render quality and the shadow quality. Here different items that we can see on the garment. Here we can hide and show the avatar. And here the arrangement point, which I think is one of the most important. You can basically have a preview and see how the garment is going to be arranged on the avatar before actually committing to that. And there are different ways of displaying the garment: monochrome, texture, thickness, and wireframe. I personally use a lot the monochrome and the thickness, and sometimes the wireframe to see how much density there is in some areas. There are also strain map, which are useful sometimes to see how much strain and pressure there is in some areas of the garment, and I can demonstrate that in a second. So if we hide the arrangement points and we create a pin box here and simulate, we can see with the color code going from blue to red which are the areas of major strain, and we can also see the pressure points where the fabric is touching the body. Here is where we create the 2D patterns, and you can see the silhouette of the character, which will be really useful to understand the size of the pattern compared to the actual character. We can create a square pattern, for example with the S key, and manipulate with the A key. This is the transform pattern. We can also, with the A key, select multiple patterns and scale them and manipulate them together. Then continuing here with the Z, with the edit pattern, we can select a single segment or vertices and move it. V, manipulate vertices. With C, we can manipulate curves, and with X we can add points. We can also right click and choose how do we want to split, with very precise measures or with the uniform split. Here, for example, we can decide in how many points uniformly we want to split this segment. This is a really useful tool. Then there are the drawing tools, and we can see there is the polygon with H. I can draw a pattern with a polygon line. S is a square, but depends how you drag. You can do a square or a rectangle. And then the ellipse. These are the basic tools that we use to create patterns. Next are sewing tool, which we use to sew together different pieces of garment. The shortcut is N, and you can click on an edge and then click on the next edge of the other piece of garment, and you can see that these lines are created. This is the sewing pattern, and very important is this tick that we see. This gives us the direction of the sewing, and when we're going to simulate, we're going to see that these are going to stitch together. So as I said before, this direction is very important, because if you don't use the correct direction, see, these threads are going to be flipped and the sewing is going to be incorrect. So you need to always pay really big attention to the direction of the sewing. And in order to fix this, with the B key we can select and edit the sewing, and with Ctrl B we can revert it and fix it to the correct direction. So very important, always look at these tick lines that we have. These are going to give us the direction of the sewing. Here we have the fabric tab, and we can create different kind of fabrics. For example, one for a shirt, and another for the pants. And here we can change different characteristics of this fabric. For example, the color, and we can assign it to the different garments. Something very important as well is that we need to understand that there are a front and a back side. See, the darkest is the back side, and this lighter color is the one that is the positive normal of the fabric, and that's very important, first of all for the simulation and also for the sewing. We need to make sure that we are always sewing positive with positive and negative with negative, otherwise the sewing is going to be inverted. Here under the characteristic of the fabric there are lots of different parameters. On top there are the appearance of the material, where we can choose the color. We can also add a texture, and this can be really useful, and I can show you later why. We can change the opacity, and in reflection the roughness, so all the appearance of the material. And down there are the physical properties of the material, so how this material is going to react to the simulation will be different. And here there are different materials like wool or silk, Sherpa or cottons. They're going to react very differently from the physical point of view to the simulation. And the other parameters that are really important are the garment parameters. Here the most important is the particle distance in millimeters. We always start at 20 when we are building garment and doing the first simulations, and then when we are sure that we like some of this garment and we want to have a more accurate simulation, we can go down to 10, and then maybe we can go down to 8, and only for the final simulation we can go to 6, but I wouldn't go lower than these values. So 20 to start and you're good. Then there are layers, so we can basically layer multiple garments on top of each other. Other two important are the shrinkage, weft and warp. This is the weft is the horizontal shrinking and the warp is the vertical, and changing very little amount of these can also give us more or less wrinkle in one direction or the other. Before starting the garment creation, I want to show you a few more tools. This on top is the Reset 2D Arrangement tool, which is very important to go back to the previous simulation state of the garment. Another is the Show Wind controller. So normally when you're simulating, you're only simulating by gravity, but sometimes adding a little bit of wind can be useful. So if we go here and we switch to Sim browser, under environment we can see wind and wind controller, and you can see that it's off. If I turn this on and then simulate again, you can see that I can add and rotate this wind, and this can be particularly useful when you want to create a flag or a cape. Not always, but sometimes it can be useful to add some wind to your scene. Now let's take this off again and let's go back to Fabric. So in Fabric, something that is important and quite useful is to import 2D patterns, so we can trace pattern to create the garment. So basically I can create another fabric and call this pattern and create another square and this will be the one that I'm using as a reference for the pattern creation. I'm going to add a texture. For example, these trousers. You can see that when the texture is loaded, it's repeating. Then I can move it using the T key for texturing and then scale it here. After, I can get out of this and use this as a tracing pattern. Basically, on top, I can start to create the garment. That. This is the garment, and then apply another material to this one. Let's get into the pattern creation now. I'm going to start now on the garment creation. In this case, I took a pre-made shirt, which comes from the basic garments of Marvelous Designer, and I'm just readjusting and repurposing the shirt to our character. Marvelous Designer come with some pre-made garments, and sometimes it's just good to take advantage of this pre-made shirt and pants or whatever to just speed up your process. You don't need to really create everything from scratch. In this case, just it's going to speed up my workflow. I'm just readjusting the shapes. Our character has quite a big belly, so I'm doing a much bigger gap there and shape. And for the moment, I'm just removing the sewing of the sleeves and using pins, moving everything into place. And sometimes you need also to delete one part and just mirror on the other side with sewing. Now I resew again the sleeves, and they are working pretty well. Many times it's really tricky, the area around the sleeves, so that's also one of the reasons why I start from a pre-made shirt. It's going to make my work very faster and easier. Nowadays you can find a lot of garments for sale in ArtStation or other marketplaces, and sometimes it's just good to have a start instead of going from scratch all the time. Here I'm separating the front parts, and I'm going to freeze the right side so it doesn't simulate. See, when you freeze, turn into a blue color, and you know that is not participating to the simulation, but still act as an obstacle if you have other clothing. So I'm pinning in a couple of places just to give the shape that I want. I'm going to wrap this all around. Will take few attempts because our character is so fat and he has a really weird shape. So you can see how pinning is such a simple and great tool to use. I'm attaching an extra piece to the front garment, and you can see it's going to take me few attempts before I get to the correct shape I want, but it's going to go there. It's going to be okay in a bit. See, I'm moving the garment again, pinning and stretching a bit the shape. I'm pinning again the bottom. Many times you need multiple pins in different areas until you find the shape that you want. Sometimes it's also useful to hide your avatar, because it could get in the way, and some of the pins may go inside the avatar. See, now without the avatar I'm shaping and then getting the avatar back again. Now I'm making sure that the next garment is on layer 1, so I can simulate it on top of layer 0. See, I'm changing the layer and I'm freezing, and I'm moving the second garment on top of the first one. I'm starting on the other side and moving into place, using again pinning. So this is the layer 1 that goes on top of layer 0. I'm readjusting and trying to match the shape of the design. So it's a sort of a kimono. I'm giving more of a round curve around there. Using multiple pinning, and here I'm just smoothing the corner. And I'm going to create a belt now. So just 2 squares of fabric to put around the waist. This is going to help me a lot to simulate, and I'm going to freeze as soon as possible. So this is going to be really helpful to keep in place the shirt and simulating some of the wrinkle. Sewing. See, sewing and then simulating, and you can see it's falling on the floor. I'm going to use the shrinkage weft to a 50%, so it's going to shrink and hold that part into place. I'm going to freeze it very soon. So once it's freezed, it's going to help me to hold the rest of the shapes. See, now I can move the shirt and the belt is staying. I'm going to start to create some material separation here. So one material for the belt, which is going to be more rigid, and another material for the shirt. I'm starting to create a trim all around the shirt. It's just a piece of fabric that is going to create a sort of a neck. I'm measuring the 2 sides, making sure they are as close as possible in measure. So once I sew them, I'm not going to have pinching. Moving it into place and sewing and simulating. I'm going to attach multiple pieces. Here I'm rotating. using the fold arrangement tool, and also using seam taping, which make the edges much harder compared to the rest of the fabric. So this part of the neck is going to be more rigid compared to the rest. And I'm going to repeat the same operation on the back of the neck, creating two pieces as close as possible to the size of the neck. Actually, you need to be really precise, because otherwise you're going to start to have quite a lot of pinching if the measurements are not matching. I'm duplicating it and going to reattach to the other side. Always be very mindful of the direction of the normals. You can see that the dark part is the negative normals. Sewing these two pieces together, sometimes it's a bit tricky and you need 2-3 attempts to get it right. And reshaping the forms. I'm going to do seam taping the edges again. This makes them harder. I'm freezing and starting to simulate all together. And now one last piece. Always following the same steps. Measuring, reshaping and sewing pieces. You need to be also careful where do you place your object in space, because this is going to affect your simulation. I need to attach one more piece and also make sure that you are simulating as layer 1, so it goes on top of the previous layer. Measuring a few more pieces and sewing them together. And moving them back to place and sewing and simulating again is always the same, repeating the same task. So you need to be really precise with your sewing. I'm starting now with the trousers. I'm going to draw a square and put the patterns as a texture on this square. I'm adjusting using the texture tool with the hotkey T, adjusting the size. So looking at the silhouette of the character, I can more or less judge how big they should be compared to the character. And I'm going to trace with the polygonal tool, using some transparency and reshaping again using the C key to reshape the curves, and then applying another material on it. In this case, I keep separate material for the shirt and another material for the trousers and another material for the pattern. So they're all separate materials. I'm reshaping the back of the trousers now. Moving the pattern, we don't need it anymore, freeze it. I'm starting to move in place the different parts, front and back. So 2 pieces from the front pieces and 2 pieces for the back. Always making sure that the normal are facing the correct direction. Using the placements, the arrangement points, to have a preview of the simulation. As I said, it's quite tricky because of his big belly. Sewing and simulating. I'm going to stretch the proportions to make them fit. Few more attempts and we have the basic trousers. I'm going to attach a few more pieces for the belt and making it really quite thick. Usually this sort of horizontal belt help quite a lot to keep in place pieces like trousers. Because sometimes they tend to slide down, especially on a body like the fat body of our character. I'm going to reshape multiple times because I want to get also this sort of short and fluffy kind of trousers. See multiple attempts here, sort of tricky. I've frozen the part now and I continue adding another 2 trims on the bottom. This is going to help me quite a lot to get the shape I want. In fact, I'm going to give a different shrinkage on the central part of the trousers, and this will make them really fluffy, and they're going to stop at the height of the knees. Trying different materials for the simulation could help as well. I'm going to put back the shirt and see how they work all together. Going to have a check in all the pieces, put it back into position and unfreeze piece by piece and see how the simulation is working. Going to save it, it's a good habit. Giving a bit of simulation, then freezing again the belt and simulating multiple times. I'm also giving a different material for the neck, so making sure there is a much harder and stiffer material. Another thing I do very commonly, I duplicate the layer inside, and this helps to get a more stable and reliable simulation. So basically you duplicate your pattern, but you just export the external one and not the internal one. The internal is just for a simulation. This is done by selecting a garment and with the right click, layer clone under. Freezing again everything. And I'm going to create few little pieces for the lower part of the legs, giving again a different material, using the arrangement points to have a quick preview. Now I'm going to sew the lower pieces. I'm going to shrink them quite a bit using the shrinkage weft of 50%. This is going to shrink quite a bit the fabric, so I'm making sure that they stick to the legs instead of falling down. I'm also giving a sort of a harder material. I'm trying different materials for this part of the garment, and I'm also using the seam taping tool, so in this way I make this part much harder. I'm using also the elastic and the shrinkage. I'm now creating internal lines to create a more interesting shape in this area of the legs. As you can see, I'm going to reshape multiple times. With these internal lines, I'm going to use the fold tool and increase the folds. Now I'm repeating the same for the armrest. Here I'm going to cut and sew and readapt this part of the garment to the arm. I'm going to layer these underneath the sleeves and play with different values of shrinkage, weft. And changing the shape until I'm happy with that, and then duplicate on the other side. At this point I'm unhiding all the rest and resimulating. So I'm only simulating the sleeves for now. This way I don't get all the other parts on the way. I'm just concentrating in one piece. I'm quite happy overall, and I think it's good for now. I'm testing different materials now. This is extremely important for the simulation, to get the right folds in the right place and get the right feeling of the correct material. I'm using also the advanced pinching tool, which you can access during simulation in the moving mode with the right click and go into the advanced pinching. It works very similar to a soft selection tool in Maya and can help you quite a lot to get the right folds and moving fabric in different directions. I'm trying different type of cotton. I want to get the feeling of a really coarse material, not too refined and not too many folds. Trying different settings. Sometimes it's good to simulate only one part of your garment and freeze all the rest, so you can just concentrate in few little areas at the time. Now I'm going to work just on the trousers because I'm not really convinced about these shapes, and I'm going to try 2 or 3 different kind of cotton. I think I will settle down for cotton 40, but doesn't really matter. There's not really a recipe to add 1 + 1 = 2. You just need to really try. Anyway, these material, they can give you a really good feeling for it. Cotton react quite similar to the real cotton, or silk will have much more refined shapes and folds. It's basically a good way to get the right size of folds and changing also particle distance to a smaller amount for the last simulation. I think overall I'm quite happy now with the shapes. And this is the final result. I'm quite happy with that. See you in the next chapter.